Good evening. As we begin tonight, I want to ask a few questions to get us thinking and also to make sure that we're all on the same page. And I'm going to ask you to actually feel free to audibly say yes or no so we can all get a sense of where we're at. So question number 1, do you enjoy being successful? Number 2, does it make you happy to see growth in areas of your life that are important to you? Awesome. Number 3, are you willing to work hard if it means that you'll have improvement? Awesome. Number 4, does it make you happy when others notice your improvement? And number 5, does it make you happy to think about what it would be like to be one of the best at something that you really enjoy, like a sport, a profession, or a hobby? All right, I'd say we're all on the same page. I'll tell all of you right now, I'd answer a great big yes to all these questions as well. I know that I'd say yes to the concept of these questions, and if I pause for a moment to think about different stages of my life, I can come up with particular concrete examples of when I worked extra hard at things, put huge amounts of time into training and practicing, and in a sense became consumed with becoming better and better. In high school, this was the case with music. I wanted to be the best trombone player in the world, and that drive and desire was magnified exponentially when I found out that if I did well enough to audition for and be admitted into the top band, I'd get to go to Disney World to perform over spring break. I cannot even begin to imagine how many headaches I gave my parents as I would practice for hours a day. Then when I was in seminary, I began making rosaries with pliers and chain and glass beads, and they were beautiful. But after a while, it wasn't enough. So then I started making them with crystal beads because they looked nicer. That lasted for a while, but then it had to be sterling silver chain that I would use with it, because that would get even bigger reactions from people when they would see them. Finally, after ordination, my 2 big things have been running and golf. Right? I'll follow training plans for running and push myself faster and faster, run through aches and pains for the sake of running longer distances. Right? Other priests, they'll laugh at me because after a long run, I'll carry huge bags of ice, right, into the tub, and they'd be like, when I was at other rectories, they'd be like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "It's time for an ice bath, of course." They're like, "You are crazy." With golf, it's never enough for me just to simply enjoy a day at the course with a friend. If I know I'm golfing on a given day, I have to get to the driving range a couple of days before. Then the morning of the round, I have to get to the driving range again to perfect my swing. Have to make sure I'm putting 30 minutes before, just have to make sure it's all good. All these examples just scratch the surface of my obsession with doing well, desiring to succeed, and enjoying the fact that eventually someone will hopefully notice and affirm me for my performance. Now, all of us here are different personalities and temperaments that, of course, will change the degree to which these things are important to us. But deep down, every single one of us, we long and desire to be loved, cherished, and accepted. And if we sense that being good at something will enable us to achieve this longing, my guess is we're all willing to work hard, maybe even spend lots of time, money, and effort to accomplish it. But here's the funny thing that I've come to notice. It's that there's one more thing that's important to me that I spend a lot of time doing, but that doesn't seem to fit into the same category as the other things I've mentioned so far. And that one thing is this. I can stand in front of you this evening and tell you that I understand and I acknowledge 100% that the most important thing for me to succeed in and to grow and seek progress in is my relationship with God, and my growth in holiness and sanctity, and my growth in virtue. But unfortunately, I can't say that I strive to grow in this most important aspect of my life with the same fervor as I strive to run faster and longer, or with the same dedication in which I try to hit a golf ball perfectly straight. And it might seem shocking, and I certainly hope as I say this it isn't scandalous for any of you, but my hope is that in pointing it out, if you find yourself in the same boat, that together we can come up with a solution tonight. And at this point, I'll clarify, I'm not saying that I don't care about growth in holiness. It is truly my deepest desire. It is the thing I want more than anything else. And at the same time, I'll say that I'll sit down and I'll work up a training plan for holiness, just like I might do with running. My plan will consist of certain habits I know I need to fix, or adopting certain disciplines that I know will allow me to function at a higher level and just be more attentive to others. One example here would be simply, if I'm aware of the fact that I'm tired a lot, what would be a really simple solution? Go to bed earlier. Sounds simple, right? Another part of my plan for holiness would be cutting back on things I really enjoy in life that, while not sinful in themselves, maybe end up distracting me or drawing my attention away from the Lord. My key example would be my love of sports. Are sports bad? No. Right? They're actually really, really good, right? Especially if you're a Cubs fan. So I mentioned two things that would be on my spiritual training plan. Going to bed earlier, cutting back on sports. But guess what? Even though I know this will be helpful for my soul and my quest for holiness, if I'm truly honest with myself and honest with you, I'll admit that I don't seem to carry these out with the same diligence as I do with other things. Now, I don't know if you find yourself in the same boat. Do you find it easier to do what's necessary to grow and make progress in the things of the world than it is to grow spiritually? One very small litmus test, one thing just to consider would be this. Do I routinely mention the same things over and over in confession with the intention of making a change? But as time rolls past, I notice that I'm still confessing the same thing. So maybe I haven't made those efforts to ensure that there will be a difference. Again, I don't know if you find yourself finding it difficult to make progress spiritually. But if you do, like me, why is this the case? I've taken time recently to reflect on this. I think I've come up with an idea as to why this is the case. And it all pertains to those questions that I asked you a little while ago. You see that growth, success, and acknowledgement that tends to motivate a lot of our actions and decisions, right? And this is natural because our hearts are made for love and acceptance. But this success, this growth, and this acknowledgement, it doesn't show up in the same way with the spiritual life as it does with almost any other thing. In fact, a lot of times we can put in a ton of effort spiritually, but on the surface, it doesn't seem to get us anywhere. And I think the reason is precisely because I mentioned a moment ago, it's natural to want to be successful in the eyes of the world. But the spiritual life isn't natural. It's supernatural. When we see growth and progress in our skills and talents, others see this and it benefits us. Growth in holiness, however, it seeks to benefit God. Now, of course, deep down it does benefit us, but on the surface level, a lot of times it actually requires us to deny ourselves and put aside the praise and admiration of others. Jesus makes this abundantly clear in saying point blank, if anyone wishes to be my disciple, they must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. I think that directive from our Lord, it answers the question as to why it can be a struggle to be dedicated to doing whatever is necessary and working really hard for growth in holiness. It's because putting in extra work in our skills and our talents yields success and admiration from those around us. Whereas putting in extra work in the spiritual life yields self-denial, the cross, and at times, misunderstanding from others. In other words, both are hard, both require perseverance and effort, but on the surface, one yields pleasure, while the other might leave you empty and exhausted. And just based on that, I think we can agree that subconsciously, it's a lot easier to sway towards pleasure rather than self-denial. Hopefully, too, as I mention all this, we can begin to see that if we're too focused on gaining affirmation and fulfillment from the world around us, which I think we all do to some level, it can make it really hard to remain focused on God. because we can't be primarily focused on ourselves and on God at the same time. One person who was caught up in this vicious cycle of striving for success and admiration was St. Ignatius of Loyola, whose story can offer us some inspiration and a whole lot of hope. Ignatius was a soldier in the Spanish army. He was really good at what he did. He was, in fact, a general who had many men that served under him, and he had this incredible ability to encourage them to fight bravely no matter what the odds were. At one point in the middle of a war against the French, his orders were to protect a certain city and hold off any and all attacks that would come from the French. Well, one day, a lookout came running in and gave the horrible news that there was an incredibly large troop of French soldiers on their way to that very city that Ignatius and his soldiers were defending. From the information that they learned, they were so heavily outnumbered, and as a result, all of the generals there, every single general, except one, said that they should surrender the city, fall back, and live to fight another day. Guess who that one general was? Ignatius. And he was so convincing and so persuasive that he was able to convince all the rest of the generals, and thus the entire army, to stay and defend the city for the honor of Spain. And in his mind, he thought about, this is perfect. This is my chance. He was actually glad that the odds were so terrible, because he figured when he would win this battle against all odds, his fame and his fortune would skyrocket. It would be beyond anything that any other general had known in Spain. Totally foolish, right? I think we can be assured he would emphatically have answered yes to all the questions I asked in the beginning. Now, I will say that usually, 99.9% of the time, when pride wins an argument against prudence, bad things happen. And that's exactly what happened when the French arrived. Many soldiers lost their lives. It was a complete disaster. And at some point during the battle, a cannonball hit Ignatius and completely shattered his leg. When he was found by the French, they were merciful to him because he was a general. So they set his leg and they allowed him to return home to an estate owned by his family. And shortly after this, as his leg was mending, he was told and informed that the French doctors didn't do a good job of setting the bone and that it was healing wrong. And he said, okay, well, what does that mean? And they said, it's okay. It'll heal, but from this point forward, you'll walk with a limp. He was so prideful that he ordered the doctors to re-break his leg in order to set it properly. And I should mention this happened in the 1500s. Right? They didn't have the same anesthesia that we have today. And they did that. They broke his leg again so that he wouldn't have to have a limp. I give you that little detail to give you an idea of what motivated Ignatius. Fame, glory, success in all things. Well, as you might imagine, this healing, it took a while. So as he lay in bed, he asked for books to be brought to him with stories about knights and dragons and princesses whose hands were to be won. But the people who were helping him heal, they're like, so we don't have any books like that, but, if you want something to read, we'll bring you the books that we had. And the books that they had, the only books that they had, thanks be to God, in the history of the church, thanks be to God, that's the way it worked out, were books on the life of Christ and the lives of the saints. And at first he's like, oh, yeah. No, those aren't my kind of thing. But after weeks and weeks of having nothing to do, he eventually picked them up, right? A modern day equivalent, the Wi-Fi went out, right? And at first, when he picked up these books, he said that they were really difficult for him to read because it just felt different than anything that he had read before. But as he continued to read over time, he said that he found that he began to get a lot of pleasure and joy and even experienced peace from these stories. So day after day, he would begin to read these stories about Jesus and the saints. And he said that at the same time, when he'd put those books down, eventually he would also daydream about glory, knighthood, fame, and fortune. And he said that after a while, he began to notice that when he would think about knighthood and glory, he'd be filled with pleasure and happiness. But that once he ceased thinking about these things, he found that he was left empty and unfulfilled. On the other hand, though, he found that when he would think about God and the saints, he said that that was enjoyable, but that after he would stop actively thinking about spiritual things, that he would remain content and he would remain filled with peace, right? So looking at worldly things like, oh, this is great, this is fun, but once he would stop, it was fleeting, it would go away. But when he'd be reading the spiritual things and thinking about God and praying, when he would just kind of stop, he just still felt content. And he reflected on this, and the result of this reflection is what we know now today as the Ignatian spirituality discernment of spirits. That in all things we need to strive to understand, are we being motivated and led by the Spirit of God, or are we being motivated and led by the spirit of the world? And he says this is so important, because in the end, the spirit of the world that motivates so many people so many times, things look good, and maybe it does make us happy for a while. But in the end, it leaves us empty and unsatisfied. Whereas the Spirit of God, known as the Holy Spirit, when we follow the Spirit of God, he will lead us to be happy, content, and ultimately even help our burdens seem light. And because of this, even though seeking holiness meant setting glory aside, Ignatius, he did a 180 in his life. He changed his focus, and he said that from that day forward, he was going to dedicate everything that he did striving for sainthood instead of knighthood. And he did this because while it didn't give surface pleasure, praise, or admiration, it offered him something that he said was incredibly deeper and that was lasting and so much more fulfilling. I think an image that we could use for this, and I love using this image when it comes to just seeking to go deeper in the spiritual life, right? Would be that the glory that he would get when concerned with progress in the world, the same glory that we can be tempted to focus on, is like pouring a bunch of lighter fluid on a match, right? Flares up right away. It's impressive. It makes people go, ooh, or it makes people ooh and ah and smile with delight. But it lasts for a moment, and then it's gone. On the other hand, if we use the same match and light a coal with it, the results aren't flashy. A lot of people won't notice it, but it will hold the heat. It will be effective. And at the same time, it'll have the ability to warm and to heat and positively affect anyone else who comes near. And this is what Ignatius came to understand, and it's just as true for us today. If I briefly apply these principles to my examples of what I can get so caught up in, I see the same results. Let's say I go out golfing tomorrow, and for the first time in my life, I hit a hole-in-one. I'd be super, super excited. I'd tell everyone. All of you would absolutely hear about it in a homily really soon, right? But would that hole-in-one, would it affect my life in any way? Would it change the circumstances of my life? Would it take away hardships I have in my life? Would it make me a better person? No. It's not that it would be a bad thing. It would be a great thing. But it's not lasting. So too would it provide anyone more grace if they're praying on a rosary that's made from diamonds and 24 gold carat chain? No. But it's so easy to be consumed by spinning our hamster wheel over and over, running and running aimlessly to progress in things in order to, or to obtain things for the sake of seeking true joy. When in the end, when it really comes to what is going to make us joyful, how much of our time are we actually spending running in the wrong direction? The joy from the hole-in-one just won't last. But Jesus, at the Last Supper, he said, I chose you and I appointed you that you might go bear fruit. Fruit that will last. And after he says this, that I ask you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, he says, I have told you this so that my joy might be in you and that your joy might be complete. What is the fruit that lasts, if not growth in the spiritual life? Which is growth that deep down beneath the superficial surface, it truly does give us a share in the joy of Christ that lasts. All of us want our joy to be complete. I'm sure we have things in our lives that give us joy. But I'm sure we also would all say that we want more, we seek more. Our joy isn't complete. But if we seek Christ, He gives us everything. Keeping this in mind can help us to not run after things because they provide a quick flash of pleasure, like lighter fluid on fire, or say like a firework, like, whoa, it's so beautiful, and it's gone, right? But to choose to do things insofar as they lead you closer to God. Conformity with Christ has to be our goal. So I hope that this gives you a little insight into why it's worth it to make and to stick with a game plan for progress in the things of the Lord, even though its benefits might be beneath the surface. It can be helpful to keep in mind that just like growth and progress in the things of the world takes time, the same is true of growth in holiness. I think a lot of times as we're trying to grow in virtue, to grow in the ways of the Lord, to grow in the relationship with the Lord, sometimes it can seem slow. We need to make sure that we don't give in to discouragement. What we need to do is simply consistently come to the Lord in simple prayer. Prayer that we don't judge its effectiveness based on emotion. Prayer that probably won't feel like fireworks going off. Simply bring yourself consistently into the presence of the Lord, just like we're doing right here tonight. And I want you to always remember that unlike progress in the world and with other skills, prayer, it's not about performance. It's not about getting a good grade. It's not about getting a perfect score. It is simply about deepening a relationship. And how does that happen? Simply by spending time, right? If we meet someone new and we think that they're great, and we're all of a sudden like, hey, so we're going to be best friends, okay? They'd be like, you're kind of weird, right? Like, that's not how it works. It's that you just spend time, more and more time. And eventually, after spending that time together, you just find like, wow, this is really beautiful, and I'm getting joy out of this friendship and out of this relationship, right? I think it could be helpful, too, to realize that the goal that our heart has, that is yearning for, is to seek acceptance, affirmation, to know that we're loved. And we can work so hard at it trying to prove ourselves. But when we're in prayer, in our relationship with God, spending time with Him, no matter where we are, the goal's already accomplished. We can spend our entire life trying to earn this love, earn this acceptance, and prove ourselves. Let me tell you right now, 100% God loves you, 100% He accepts you, and 100% He cherishes you just as you are right now. The thing that we spin our hamster wheels, like trying to do everything we can to achieve this thing. Congratulations, it's already freely given to you right now. Congratulations, you've achieved your goal. And now we just need to sit there, to sit with Him. And with all this in mind, the final thing that I'll say is when it comes to trying to figure out what's our next step in life, what do things look like, right? When it comes to discernment of what we're called to do day by day, or maybe it has something to do with our vocation or wherever we are in life, it's so important that we ensure that we are responding and listening to the Spirit of God and not the spirit of the world. And in order to discover what specific purpose God is calling us to and is asking us to concern our lives with, we should not be using my initial list of questions as the benchmark as to whether or not something is right for us. But instead to ask ourselves every day, is what I'm concerning myself with, is what I'm thinking maybe I should do next, is it something that is leading me closer to God or not? And we use that discernment in the big things and the little things. Right? For anyone right now who's wondering, what's the next step? What is it that God is calling me to? Let me assure you that the answer, it lies deep in the depths of your heart. The answer lies in the movements of the Spirit of God. The Spirit that seeks to speak through us through deep, lasting peace, like that of a coal that burns slow and steady. And if you have one coal that's on fire, how is it that you get another one on fire? You simply bring it next to it, right? And it spreads. We've brought ourselves to the Lord tonight, and we simply just need to, as Psalm 46 says, be still and know that I am God. That second coal, it doesn't do anything to make itself catch fire. It simply is there in the presence of the other, and it simply receives that heat. So now we're just going to transition to an opportunity to pray, to be in the presence of the Lord, and to be given the opportunity to listen to the Spirit speak in the depths of our hearts. And again, time spent with the Lord, it's not about proving ourselves. It's not about checking off any boxes. It's not about gaining any sort of success. Christ has already won the victory, and he simply wants to share his victory and his glory with you tonight. So I encourage you to open up your heart to whatever it is that he has for you tonight.